with certainty that your senses and reasoning are working properly to begin with, and you're not just deceiving yourself?
Yeah, so actually, the ironic part is that, or I feel like if you're asking me how I can trust those senses and my reasoning, or essentially how I know I'm not, as you said, deceiving myself, that's a form of skeptical Wow, I can't talk, sorry. Skeptical epistemology, and that challenges whether we can trust our perceptions and logic at all. So
Right.
if you doubt my reasoning, then does that not also mean that you must doubt your own? So if I can't trust myself,
No. And I'm glad you brought that to no, it wouldn't. And I can explain why, but if you want to go ahead and finish your thought, but
yeah, sorry.
if not, no.
Yeah, so if I cannot trust my own senses or logic, then why is it that you can? And which?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm happy to explain. And that's ultimately my ultimate proof on why you do know God exists and that you're just suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, as God says in Romans chapter 1, 18 through, and Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, where it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So unless you start with God, you cannot know anything. Yeah, so the differences between me and you is we both have to deal with what is called the infinite regression of knowledge. Do you know what that is, or would you like me to explain it?
No, I think I understand.
Okay.
I'm going to try to...
Yes.
Yeah, so sorry, just...
So you know the two, then you understand the only two possibilities to get out of the infinite regression of knowledge, correct?
Yeah, sorry, wait, just really quickly, I do want to make sure that I know what you're talking about. That refers to the idea that, like, you know, every belief must be justified by another belief, which then requires its own justification, the whole Otis thing leading to an infinite chain, unless there's some foundational starting point for knowledge.
Correct.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, yeah, so there are only two ways to get out of that. Do you know what those are?
I think so. Again, I'm going to try to say them and
Okay.
make sure.
I'm not doing a got you. I'm just wanting to be clear, just so you know we can make the conversation work well. So if you don't know, I have no problem with explaining it.
I want to make sure that I do actually understand it, because I'm. Well, the first one I think is foundationalism, and then the second is presuppositionalism. Sorry, I can't talk again.
I would challenge. I would probably disagree on that one. You can't, like, if you're gonna do I wouldn't allow like just a random presupposition on it, because if you get to presuppose something, then so do I, and it's not gonna work out. But essentially, the only way to get out of the infinite regression of knowledge is, two things: is you either have to know everything, because that would obviously follow, because every question that somebody would have for you, you would be able to answer and say what the foundation is. And then, so that would be one. So you'd either have to know everything, or you would have to be relying on the one who does. And so I would say that because obviously if somebody was telling you, giving you the foundation to rely on your senses and reasoning, then you could go off of that. So I would say that would be the Christian God of the Bible would meet that category. So I clearly don't know everything. So I know that is not the case. But we do know that we do know some things, so we know that there has to be one of those options. So then it leaves the only other option as we are relying on the one who does.
Absolutely.
So that's why I'd say it would be different. That's why my reason, like my justification for how we could trust our senses and reasoning would be different than what you were.
And when we don't know
the road you were going down.
When we don't know these things, we fall into these line of thinking where we then begin and agree with such ideology like abortion, right?
Yeah.
Even though when I would ask you, even though I would ask you certain questions like I have on this topic, Yappy, and I'm testing your logic in other areas, giving you other scenarios, you then want to exercise your morality in those scenarios, but you're struggling to justify abortion and telling me why it's moral, even though we could challenge you with, what you and the rest of mankind has observed all through history, that children bring goodness, that it is in our nature and design and order to procreate and have families, and it has a positive outcome and result. But you're allowing such an action and you're trying to justify it in this conversation. So I appreciate that Kanoa's here, because ultimately this is going to be where we're going to end up having to take a good hard look at ourselves, right? At our
it comes down to worldviews with all these conversations. If you follow the trail back far enough, it will eventually get to your worldview.
Amen.
Yeah, sorry. So you did bring up quite a few things there. So I'm sorry if I can't address all of it, but I'm going to try to start with.
Well, do you want to get back to where we were kind of talking about on dealing with the infinite regression and how you were going to do that with your worldview?
What you said was that the only two ways to get out of it would be, or to escape that infinite regress would be, one, knowing anything, or sorry,
knowing everything, or relying on the one who does. You obviously reject that other option of relying on the one who does.
On someone who does, which you claim, or you claimed that the Christian God does that, but at the same time, that does assume that God exists.
Yes.
And that he was the necessary foundation for knowledge of that. And it didn't actually prove that. So that's the way.
I can show you that, because it's the impossibility of the contrary. There's no other possibility for that, because the preconditions for logic and reasoning are only exclusive to the Christian God. You won't find it in Islam or the other beliefs.
And are you atheist, Yappy? Do you claim to be atheist?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't like to consider myself that quite as much, because I don't think that it's something where I can. I don't fully align with agnosticism either, but I don't think I can disprove the existence of a God. But I don't.
Well, you would say that the world does not show dependence on a God. You'd say the world shows independence, and you would say logic and reasoning definitely don't show dependence on relying on the one who does, which would be God. So you would say that it would be independent of that. So then you would just have to provide either a third option, or you'd have to show how you can know everything to get out of that infinite regression of knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing, actually, is that I feel as though you haven't. Well, okay, there are two things that I want to address here. The first is you haven't actually proven that logic requires God.
Yeah, sure, I did. You want me to walk you through it again?
Sorry, is it okay if I just address both of those? Because I feel like I'm
go ahead then.
Lose my train of thought otherwise. You claimed that knowledge or logic and reasoning only come from the Christian God, but you haven't. And I'm sure you, or like you said that you would be able to. So I'm okay with that. But you haven't actually yet demonstrated why that's true. Logic functions independently of belief systems or religion. So like atheists, agnostics, and people from all religions who use logic and reason successfully, they are able to without invoking religion.
Yeah, can you demonstrate that for me? How are you able to use logic and reasoning correctly without relying on God?
Yeah, sorry, I can reply to that as well. It's just the other thing is, really quickly before I answer it, it's just, you also said the impossibility of the contrary thing.
Yeah.
But I feel as though saying there's no other possibility doesn't yet prove your case. It just assumes that it's true. So I do ask you to demonstrate that after. But yeah, I can address the other thing as well. I think the way I can use logic and reasoning correctly without relying on God, or at least I assume that it's to the best of my abilities to assume so. I think that I can use logic and reasoning correctly without relying on God, because logic is a necessary and self-evident framework that does not require a deity. So I can give reasons for that, or I could sit with that. But
yeah, so can you show me how you know things with certainty, and that you're being logical right now, and you're not just being deceived? Because you and I both agree that there's people in this world whose senses and reasoning are not working properly to begin with, so how they view reality is incorrect. So they would think the stove is off when in reality it's on, and they can touch the stove and say, "Oh, look, I'm not being burnt," when in reality they are. So how do you know you're not one of those people?
yeah, so I think.
Is he good? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So I think you're right to hint absolute certainty. I think that's what you had as well. Is that from my logical framework, absolute certainty may not always be possible. So I do acknowledge that all human knowledge operates with degrees of certainty, not, absolute infallible certainty. So instead I rely on...
Are you absolutely sure about that, sir?
That's pretty... Yeah, I understand the point that you're making, but I guess I should first address that one thing from before. Some truths are also self-evident. So, like, certain truths don't require justification, as in they must be assumed.
Can you tell me what is truth? Since you keep using the word truth, can you tell me what truth is?
Yeah, the way in which I define truth usually comes down to sort of saying that truth is that which corresponds to reality.
Yeah, and so how do you know what's real?
I mean, again, like I said before, I think that absolute certainty is often impossible.
Are you absolutely certain that absolute certainty is impossible?
Am I what?
Are you absolutely certain that absolute certainty is impossible? You see the problem with your worldview, man?
Yeah, I see what you're saying and what you're getting at. I'm not absolutely certain that absolute certainty is impossible.
Well, then why'd you make the claim of absolute certainty?
Well, yeah, but that would be a self-defeating claim.
Exactly, sir. So that means that that's going to be false. So we have no reason to believe what you just said.
So it's false?
Yeah, so if you're going to say we cannot be absolutely certain about something, that's an absolute claim. And that's a self-defeater, so that's a clear contradiction with your worldview.
A misrepresentation of my position? Just because I don't...
All right, here, could you just tell me this? Are you absolutely certain that I misrepresented your worldview? I mean, and I know here's the thing is, man, I know it, like, we giggle about it because, you realize that it's silly. But this is serious. If you said if what you just said is true, that we cannot have absolute certainty about anything, then any knowledge claim that you begin to make, all I have to do is ask you, are you absolutely certain about it? And that's the problem with your worldview, man. And that's why, again, remember I said there's only two possibilities to get out of the infinite regression of knowledge, or you're left with a world of I don't know. You either have to know everything, or you're relying on the one who does. And we both know that you do know things, so that leaves you only one option that's true. You are relying on the one who does. And this is why you need to, ultimately why you need to seek Jesus Christ to be forgiven for your sins, because you do know God exists.
Can I please say this? I am actually, sorry, upon reconsideration, or in retrospect, I didn't actually answer it because I was being slow, but yeah, I am actually absolutely certain that...
I want to press you more on it, but I do want to get down to the bottom of why he thinks that.
Yeah, sorry, wait. I am actually absolutely certain because you misrepresented my worldview. You framed my position as being, if I lack absolute certainty, then my statements are false. And that's not what I said. I never actually claimed that absolute certainty is the truth. I argued that knowledge is justified.
Okay, how is it justified?
Even if it isn't infallible.
Okay, how is it justified?
Knowledge?
Yeah. How are you justifying knowledge that you can know things?
Knowledge is justified. I mean, I feel like I already answered this. I'm not sure if I did. It's justified through reason, evidence, and logical consistency. So
right, but we already walked past that, and to the point where I said, "How do you know what's real?" And you have yet to give us a justification for that. Because again, just like what I said before, you could be deceived. So you need to prove to us that you are not some brain in the vat, or you're being deceived, or...
I can justify what is real through the things that I've already tried to say.
Oh, time out, sir, but there's a problem with that. Do you understand what the problem is? When you just said, when I asked you, can you justify that your senses and reasoning are working properly to begin with, and you're not being deceived, and you just appealed to your senses and reasoning for that. But you do realize if your senses and reasoning are not working properly to begin with, you could be getting information that tells you something about reality when it actually is not in accordance to reality. So again, can you tell us how you can justify your senses and reasoning without having to appeal to them?
Yeah, so I do think there's still a reason why that objection doesn't work, though. if my reasoning were unreliable, then so is yours. And I know what you're about to say. It isn't because of your framework. But if you
yeah, but again, that's you. That's a hold on, sir. There's a knowledge claim there with what you just said. This is why I have to pause you there, because you just said if my senses of reasoning are not working properly, then that means yours are. But the problem is there are people in this world whose senses and reasoning are not working properly to begin with. Does that follow that that means that our senses and reasoning are not working because theirs are not?
I think no, that doesn't follow. Yes.
Right. So then, so again, so how are you going to say, oh, if my senses of reasoning are not working, then yours are not? So again, try one more time, sir. How do you know your senses of reasoning are working properly to begin with without having to utilize them?
Without utilizing those same things. Sorry, I'm trying to finish.
Yeah. Because if and I can say it again, because just like there's certain individuals that that I have worked with and before who we have to monitor because they will sometimes think the stove is off and that they're touching the stove and they're saying, oh, I'm fine, the stove is not on and I'm not being burned, when in reality they are. And so we have to, tell them, but they would look at us, and if we were to yell at them and say, hey, the stove is on, you're being burned, they would look at us and say, I know it's off and I'm not being burned. See? And then they would show us a hand being burned. So.
Yeah, I still do actually feel like I've encountered that same thing where I think you're misrepresenting what I'm trying to say. I never actually said that if my senses and reasoning are working, then yours must not be. That doesn't follow either.
You said if your senses and reasoning are not working, then I would have to assume that mine are not. If you'd like to re-clarify that, then go ahead.
Sorry, I don't remember exactly if that's...
Okay, well, that's fine. Go ahead and tell us then how you know your senses and reasoning are working properly to begin with, that you can rely on them.
First of all, the existence of faculty senses does not mean that all senses are unreliable. So yes, you're correct in saying that some people have impaired reasoning.
Yeah, how do you know you're not one of them?
The hallucinations, so whatever the case may be, but that doesn't mean that all reasoning is unreliable.
Correct. How do you know yours are working, though? I don't care about everybody else's. I just want to know how you know that yours are working. You keep telling me about everybody else, but we need to know about you. How do you know they are working properly to begin with?
Yep. And it is a deep question if you need to ponder it for a little longer.
Sorry, I think I get it. If you assume that your own senses and reasoning are unreliable, then you wouldn't have a way to trust anything you believe, including your belief in God.
Exactly. So here's the problem, sir. All right, so here's the thing. So if your senses and reasoning, if you cannot trust your senses and reasoning, then you cannot know anything, right?
Yeah, well, the problem that I still feel as though I'm encountering is that you're still, if you're asking me to justify my reasoning, you're using your own reasoning to doubt mine.
Yeah, but the difference is, I'll explain that. So the difference is, though, I'm not saying that I am ultimately, that my sense of reasoning are my ultimate thing that I'm relying on. You're saying that's your ultimate reason. I'm saying the only way to stop the infinite regression of knowledge is there's only two possibilities. Either I have to know everything, which I don't, so I could not trust my senses and reasoning ultimately, or we are relying on the one who does. Because here's the fact is, if let's say both possible, let's say there's no, obviously me and you do not know everything, so we would cut that one off. And then let's say the one relying on the one who does is not a possibility. Okay, well then we wouldn't be able to ground anything. We wouldn't even be able to have a standard to know what it looks like to have correct senses and reasoning at all. So we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation, but we can. So why is that? Well, then I ask you, okay, if your senses and reasoning, if your senses and reasoning is all you have to work with, then it would be faulty and you couldn't know anything. Obviously, that's not the case because we are able to reason and know things. Right. So even while you're trying to say, oh, I can't be absolute about certain things earlier, we all knew that was fake. You can be. So we can't. So here's the thing: is we might not know everything. I'm not claiming that, but we cannot be wrong about some things.
That's right.
And that's only because God exists.
Mm-hmm. There are some objective truths. In answering these questions with Kanoa, you clearly demonstrated that we know this to be true.
Well, yeah, but you're arguing that if both options were false for the objective, for the regressive, for the infinite regress in knowledge, you're arguing that if both options were false, then knowledge would be impossible, which means
Correct.
that by necessity, God must be the answer. But again, I still believe that argument does fail.
Yet you're not able to ground it yet.
Yeah, but then show us how you can have knowledge apart from God. Yeah, that's real easy then.
You're not. Then you would be able to easily say
Excuse me.
how you can confirm whether your senses are right or wrong. Hi, Cass. I'm sorry. I know you've been waiting a long time.
No, it's okay.
I do
No,
apologize.
I don't mind waiting at all. But there was another girl in here too that she really wanted to speak as well, and she
Okay.
got kicked out.
Oh,
Abigail, I think her name was.
Oh, no,
But,
kicked her.
also-
I didn't kick her. I promise.
Oh, there. Oh, thank you. I'm
Was
sorry.
my life-
Thank you guys. I'm here listening, and we're listening and all. You know, I can't wait to say my
And I'm
piece, too.
sorry. Sometimes it leads into
Respectfully,
a long.
obviously.
Well, and we can move to a different guest
Yeah.
because we already walked as far as we can. So at the end of the day, I'll just explain again for Yap. At the end of the day, you will have to justify. You'll have to provide a third option on how you can get out of the infinite regression of knowledge, or you're going to have to justify how your senses and reasoning are working properly to begin with, without having to rely on them to do so, because that would be a fallacious circle.
Yeah.
So,
Does that make sense, man?
So I understand what you're saying. And I also do feel as though you're right, Liz, and I'm like holding up the other guests, and I should allow for that. But I do have a final.
No worries.
Yeah. Just so you know, I enjoy. Heather knows I enjoy these conversations, and I saw you gave me a follow. So if you see me on a live, and I have another guy who runs some of my lives, and he'll talk with you for an hour if you want to, and you guys we'll have a good conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
absolutely. And I go
so.
hang out in those lives too. And I if I didn't have anybody at least waiting to continue on with the discussion, I'm open to that as well. But I feel like we have walked through. I think we were getting kind of going in circles.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start repeating after
I
this.
also
Yeah.
really quickly want to say I'm not sure if perhaps I am misinterpreting this, but it feels as though I'm not sure if I am, but one of the slight issues I'm encountering is that with all due respect, you do sort of keep continuously in the middle of when I'm trying to explain what I'm trying to say. You sort of cut me off and interrupt, and then after waiting for you to finish speaking in your entirety and make all of the points that you would like.
Well, we'll give you more of a chance to continue this conversation. I'm trying to kind of move it along in this discussion as well.
The thing is,
Yeah.
Minute.
You can defend.
Yeah, can I explain why? Because when I do that, it's because the moment you make any kind of truth claim, it ultimately wouldn't matter if you made 5 other points with it. If ultimately it has to be grounded in something else. Because that's what I'm saying. If you make 5, that's why I kind of jumped in and said, "Hey, man, hold on, do you know that?" Because the moment you start saying something that you would have to justify, and that's why I'm kind of like, "Hey, with what you're saying, is this something that I'm like?" It's just like when you said, "Hey, I'm not absolutely certain about, all this stuff," but then you start telling me all these things that all I have to do is ask you, are you absolutely certain about that? And so I just didn't want you to, I was kind of just stopping you before you went to all those points for just me to ask you and look like a jerk and say, "Are you sure about that?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was.
I understand that your intent isn't to do so, but regardless of that, it isn't just that it happened, it's also that the exact thing that I'm intending to do when I continue to speak is to justify that, and if you cut me off before I can actually, regardless of if you notice a flaw, like, I kind of sort of assumed, with all due respect, a mutual respect where you kind of let the other person say everything they would like to make points about, regardless of if you notice a flaw, unless it's like super major.
And that's exactly what it is I felt that it was super major, is why I cut it.
Yeah, so
He knows what you were going to say before you said it. Magnificent.
I feel as though that wasn't the case oftentimes, because I kept on saying.
Okay. All right. We'll get there.
Well, I'm
You're gonna be
sorry.
able
Yeah,
to
I'm sorry that you
explain.
feel that way.
Yeah.
But like you said, I felt it was necessary, and and you said that if I felt it was necessary, then that was fine for me to cut in. So
Yeah.
So yeah, I did feel it was necessary, but I'm sorry if you thought I was being rude. I apologize for that.
Yeah, thank you.
And what I'm trying to say is we'll give you another platform. Definitely follow him. Jump in on some of his other lives, and you'll be able to get out what your full position and what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
Even I've butt in. I know I've cut you off, okay? Because I
That
am
would be a cool live, though. That would be.
yeah, I can go now. It's just, well, really quickly before I do go, I just wanted to say like the actual thing, the point that I intended to make in response, which was that you assumed that knowledge requires an all-knowing being. So you asserted that knowledge must be grounded in an omniscient source, but you haven't yet proven that. So if
not an
humans
assumption.
reliably know things through, like reason and logic and evidence, then God isn't necessary for that knowledge. So saying if God didn't exist, then we wouldn't know anything is just an assertion. The burden of proof still lies where you have to prove that knowledge is impossible without him.
I would. Oh, sorry. I thought you were done.
Yeah, secondarily, the other thing is you are still, well, it's not just the reasoning faculties, it's also like we can escape infinite regress without actually appealing to God. So examples of those self-evident truths could be like the laws of logic, A equals A, and contradictions cannot exist with that. For basery sensory experiences, so I feel pain and I can perceive colors, as well as mathematical truths like 2 + 2 = 4.
Those are truths we know. That's not an assumption, right? Those are things we know to be true. It's no assumption.
But it doesn't change. I'll explain why when he's done. Go ahead and finish your.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm the one.
The final thing that I was
Heather rude. No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
Just so you know, I learned all that from Heather.
Yeah.
Or maybe she learned it from me.
Right? Oh, yeah. I've definitely learned some things from you, for sure. Okay.
Yeah, so sorry, just the final statement that I wanted to make about that is that those truths don't require an all-knowing being. They're simply the necessary starting point for rational thought. So, like, in conclusion, when you assume that knowledge must be grounded in an omniscient being but haven't yet justified that assumption, you still use your own reasoning to conclude that God is the very foundation of your knowledge, which means that you are relying on the very thing that you sort of said is unreliable without God, which is sort of circular reasoning. But meanwhile, I sort of tried to use at least that I can escape infinite regress through foundationalism, which allows knowledge to be justified through those same self-evident truths and reason and evidence without appealing to an all-knowing deity. So since non-Christians can successfully gain knowledge, your claim that God is required for knowledge is already sort of disproven, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I obviously disagree with that, and I don't believe you justified that. I would also recommend you check out what is called a transcendental argument, because that would help clear some things up when you said that I was being circular.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you for your time, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, definitely Yappy. Okay, we'll do this again for sure. I appreciate it. He was very polite the whole time.
Yep. Yeah.
He's got that eager
I
mind.
agree.
I think that we can get to him. So, okay.
Adrian King, God bless you. I see you in the comments, brother.
Yeah, by the way, welcome in everybody. Tap the screen, like the live. And I apologize again. Thanks for being patient to my next guest. And I can't remember, was Abigail before Cass?
Yeah, I was, but she was. I was just going to
Okay.
say she was way before me.
I thought so. Abigail, I didn't kick
I'm going to
you.
go back and mute.
I don't know what happened. It could have been just from being up here